Greetings, adventurers. Today we have a tale about a Weeabo trying to build a harem using the player characters and making them roll against his mind control tricks because apparently he's never heard of the word consent. The DM allows it, and there's only one man that can stop this horrible Weeabo. The party's inexperienced TTRPG player and resident edgelord alongside his love interest, which is one of the latest victims of this dreaded Weeabo. This is a long one, so I'm not going to waste your time and jump right into the story. Today's treasure is called How a Feud Between an Edgelord and a Sexist Weeabo Almost Derailed the Campaign. The Edgelord vs. Weeabo Feud. So a few caveats about the story before we begin. There isn't really a bombastic resolution to the story because the campaign ended prematurely due to a lack of time on the DM and the other players' schedules, which inevitably is the true villain of any TTRPG. Second, this isn't going to be a typical tale of the innocent player versus a cartoonishly vile neckbeard antagonist I'm sure many of you are used to with stories here. Since I'm not particularly an innocent party in this tale, and in fact the edgelord in the title, while the Weeabo was a pretty crappy person and I chalk up a lot of my actions to inexperience with the TTRPG etiquette and lacking common sense due to my youth and social awkwardness, I ended up breaking some cardinal rules of the TTRPG groups. I'm rather ashamed of looking back, and probably would have handled the situation much better if it was my older self. Final point, this is a story from a part of my life that was at least 12 years ago, so my memory is fuzzy on some details, and that names have been changed, yada yada. So it would functionally be my second taste of TTRPGs playing 3.5 edition Dungeons & Dragons. I was still a newbie in college and a socially awkward nerd for context. And my best friend had invited me into an online session with a group of people. It was a homebrew with a decently fleshed out world with a plot about stopping an evil xenophobic empire that really didn't like non-humans with other twists and turns. This was a sizable group, but I'll only highlight the major parties in this story. Myself, whose character was, and ready your cringe medicine, a gruff antisocial, holy rogue. Basically a 4th edition Avenger, which was a rogue but with a paladin cleric-like background. But if I remember correctly, the DM said Avengers weren't part of 3.5, but allowed me to tool a basic Rogue Ranger hybrid and signed off on the holy background elements. I'll spare the details of his tragic backstory except for what is important. He was a child slave to a deprived cult that worshipped an abyssal being that frequently used magic to hypnotize and enslave people, but was rescued by Bahamut worshipping paladins and Avengers. So he has an in-character issue with magics that mess with the mind, and especially types that are mind control stuff. This will be important soon. Lena, my best friend, they made a friendly, shy cleric who had a dark secret that sadly never got its payoff because of the campaign ending prematurely. Natalie, another player I'd be closer with most of the group, save for Lena. Her character was a flirty and snarky drow ninja. I can't remember if that was the actual class, but she was functionally that. Our characters were often paired together for stealth and recon parts of the missions, and had a bit of a funny dynamic of her drow teasing and flirting with this socially awkward and rigid Avenger that eventually bloomed into a romantic ship, teasing that most of the party was amused by. We'd end up dating briefly IRL, but it didn't last long as we broke up on healthy mutual terms. While not important to the story, this context will be important later for why I antagonized the Weeabo. Jane and Larry, a husband and wife duo who ran a lot of TTRPG games. Jane was the DM and Larry was a player. They both played a husband and wife fighter and bard duo who were wanted revolutionaries fighting the evil empire I mentioned. While functionally they were DMPCs, to the pair's credit, they made sure that the two characters weren't crazy powerful, and outside of pushing the fight the empire plot, took a backseat to allow us to explore our characters, with the pair basically being team mom and dad to our group. And finally, the Weeabo of the story, Dave. Dave's character checked off all the cringe boxes. He was a crazy powerful kitsune sorcerer wizard, I forgot his exact class but it was magical, from a totally not Japan type country, who was also this smarmy, perfect young lord looking for honor and a harem, because of course he was. The major point of contention with him that would kick off me and Natalie's feud with Dave was a NPC tied to his character. There was a tavern girl that he met on his journeys before joining the party, and I'm not joking, he literally hypnotized with his magic to become his traveling companion and lover. And he treated this as a romantic thing with a hint of subversion or irony. The NPC was this very docile and demure wallflower that basically lavished and obsessed over Dave and practically worshipped him. I think you're all getting a good picture of Dave's psyche. Now, by today's standards, obviously this dude would be cancelled so quick for such a disgusting and rapey element to his character. But it was 12 years ago, so for whatever reason, the DM didn't take issue with that. More on that later. I should mention our group had a sizable number of ladies, and I can only personally account for how a handful of them felt about Dave and his harem wish fulfillment mind control antics. Back in my college days, I was a rather low-level edgelord and typically lonely, seeking a girlfriend desperate nerd with a handful of now very outdated opinions on relationships that would make an adult me want to kick younger me's ass over. But when I found Dave's role-playing with the NPC to be disgusting and creepy, I never cared for his swarmy better than everyone else attitude. While I found him annoying, Natalie utterly loathed him. During our early sessions, things went well. I was integrated into the party decently, and in general left a good impression with my character, mostly how he started off as a typical boring, cold edgelord badass who, through actions in the story and character interactions with other players, I ended up tooling into this socially awkward dork who was trying too hard to look intimidating and clearly masking his past trauma, which the players, Nat especially, found much more enjoyable than my stick-in-the-mud Assassin's Creed knockoff I started out as. More or less, the roleplay was nice and chill, except when Dave got involved. As I quickly learned, up until my joining, Dave was constantly flirting with the other female player characters, and continued to do so even when, in character, they either politely declined his advances or made it clear they found them uncomfortable. But Dave wasn't picking up on that. He also would try his freaking hypnosis spells on player characters like his NPC waifu, but thankfully the DM made him have to pass extremely high rolls. And even then, at worst effects was just to have the characters brush off his Kitsune Lord's totally not predatory behavior as him being a silly skirt chaser and pay him no mind. So the first time he tried this creepy shit while I was in the party, he was trying to flirt with Nat's very not-interested drow ninja. He apparently, out of all the party's women, had a fixation on Nat's character and was obsessed with adding her to his one waifu harem. So when the drow tells him to buzz off, he tries to subtly perform his hypnosis spell on her. Now, my Avenger is nearby when this happens, and this is where our feud with Dave really began. See, back then, I was still a complete noob to TTRPGs, so I was ignorant of the concept of metagaming. I knew about his creepy little hypnosis trick with the tavern waifu because of the cringy backstory of how they met that he posted on his DeviantArt account that was tied to a DA group we used to post backstory info, art, and other things of our characters. My Divine Punisher, however, did not know this. My Avenger walked over and roughly grabbed the Kitsune Lord's wrists and pulled him up, snarling that he sees what perverse tricks he's trying to do and won't allow him to take advantage of the drow, as much as, at the time, the two distrusted each other. Dave got upset at this, accusing me of metagaming and whining to the DM to do something about it. At this point, the DM explained to me that what metagaming was, and first was taking Dave's side. However, Nat came to my defense, pointing out in my backstory sheet, which was also in the DA group's gallery, that given the Avenger's dark backstory, he'd reasonably know the signs of someone using mind control magics. Nat taking my side clearly did not sit well with Dave. The DM, to her credit, decided to split the baby to try to defuse the situation. She accepted that my Avenger's backstory would give me insight into how mind control magic worked, and at best reasonably assume that's what the Kitsune Lord was trying. However, Dave had to roll a deception check to force the Avenger to drop the subject as a misunderstanding. He rolled good and the Avenger let it slide, but clearly having his suspicions. In character, Nat's drow ninja briskly but sincerely thanked the Avenger for coming to her aid, though making it clear she had it under control and that she was tougher than any paltry mind trick the Kitsune had, but surprised that the antisocial holy assassin would come to a thieving money-hungry drow's defense. Avenger awkwardly comments he finds the actions of people more damning than their race or creed. This exchange is what sparked the romance-teasing side plot between Avenger and Drow Ninja, and unfortunately began me and Nat's feud with Dave. In between sessions, Nat and I grew closer and talked more about ourselves on Skype, about our interests and mutual shows we liked, along with some ideas for Avenger and Drow Ninja's relationship, just so neither of us tried to do something the other was uncomfortable with instead of springing it mid-game. However, we also talked about our mutual dislike of Dave and his creepy sex pest of a Kitsune Lord. We especially took umbrage with his mind control sex slave NPC, the Tavern Waifu. Generally speaking, the party awkwardly danced around this problematic element of Dave's character, since the NPC basically disappeared for long stretches of sessions, and the DM tried her best to keep people from picking a fight over it, Nat specifically. However, Nat figured my character introduction to the party and edgy backstory was finally the perfect in-game justification she needed to take Dave down a peg, since the DM already ruled that the Avenger had some knowledge on how hypnosis spells worked and could sniff out Dave's antics. So we conspired to finally find a way to, in-game, learn the truth of and break the mind control on Tavern Waifu and expose the Kitsune Lord for like the rapey creep that he was, and knock the wind out of Dave a bit. Between my own dislike of Dave and my growing crush on Nat, I was all in on this plan. Now I'm going to pause the story to make one thing perfectly clear. I'm not blaming Nat for my choices to metagame and grief another player, while Dave up until this point had been obnoxious and an unsettling pest in and, to a lesser extent, out of character. And he's going to be revealed to be so much worse, as I reveal near the end. His shitty non-consensual antics don't justify Nat and me beginning a little personal crusade against him, and trying to derail a player's character out of petty vigilante spite. So, in between side quests and plots, and Avenger and Drow's budding romance, the two would subtly try to expose Dave, who he himself was picking up on our dislike of him, and often tried to turn the party against the violent pair, and often using his spells or lower level hypnosis tricks to embarrass, trip up our characters, my Avenger especially. At first, the party brushed this off as harmless role-playing, as it was things like him hypnotizing my Avenger to take a plunge into a lake, or Natch Drow sticking her foot out to make him faceplant onto a stone dungeon floor. They treated it as a meaningless prank war between the three. However, things came to an head when he actually tried to hypnotize Drow into taking her clothes off. Now, after the fact, he claimed out of character his only intention was to embarrass her by making her streak across the hall of the area we were in, and there was nothing sexual about it. Both me and Nat called bullshit on this. Nat rolled high enough to avoid it, but chose to use deception to make Dave believe he was under his spell. Nat and I had been PMing each other as this was starting to play out and figured this was the best time as any to deal with Dave and his date rapist of a kitsune. So I positioned myself near them as it played out, and the justification I gave the DM when it played out was not only because of seeing someone Avenger had grown to care for seemingly in trouble, but also this specific action triggering some very effed up memories with the mind control cult he was enslaved to, drives Avenger to a rage and attacks Kitsune Lord from behind. Dave is not happy about this, accusing us of setting him up, which, granted, he was half right about, but didn't change the fact he tried to make Nat's player character get naked for him. This brief fight between Avenger and Drow Ninja versus Kitsune Lord and his tavern waifu, who of course comes to his beloved master's aid, until the revolutionary couple DMPCs come in and break it up. Now things are awkward both in and out of game, as everyone, especially the DM, has fully picked up on mutual animosity between me and Nat against Dave, who accuses us of tag teaming and bullying him. We comment that we're sick of his creepy borderline sexual offender-like antics, and a mild fight ensues. The game is paused briefly while the DM and her husband basically run the three of us through TTRPG counseling. To their credit, they admit that they did find Dave's actions a bit unsettling, but didn't want to feel like they were singling him out, for reasons that will become clear in a minute, and said our issues with Dave were valid. However, they would not abide by our scheming and borderline metagaming plot to one-up and embarrass Dave, which was straight-up player griefing, which looking back, they were justified in calling us out on. As much of a creep as Dave was, we didn't justify our TTRPG vigilanteism against him. We should have gone to the DM couple directly about our issues with Dave's sex pest antics. So finally things get back to normal. We agreed to stop our in-character feud with Dave's character, while Dave agreed to no longer use his hypnosis on his party mates. The animosity between us was still there, via slight snipes and the occasional harmless pranks against each other, but it never escalated again. Eventually, another party member, we'll call her Sam, and my best friend Lena are talking with me via Skype, and both are concerned about the grudge between me and Nat against Dave, with Lena especially not liking the drama it was causing. I admit we took things too far, but just couldn't stand the dude. It was when Sam, who, bless her kind soul, dropped a huge bombshell on us about Dave to try to get us to sympathize for him a little bit, that kinda made things worse. Apparently Dave was using an alt account, and his actual account on DeviantArt was one belonging to an infamous, for DeviantArt standards, cringelord who was known in DA circles for these incredibly sexist and tasteless fanfiction and hilariously bad art of said fanfiction that was about this OC dude who was very obviously self-insert of himself that looked almost exactly like his Kitsune Lord, savagely beating up and berating female characters he didn't like, or badly romancing the ones he did like. It was some maximum early 2000s yikes stuff. Sam reveals that according to the couple, who knew Dave personally on some level if I'm remembering this part correctly, he suffered from a number of mental health troubles, and that the reason they invited him and basically handled his troubling sex pest behavior with kids gloves up until me and Nate's crusade against him was because they felt sorry for him, and were trying to subtly help him overcome his issues with women bit by bit. However, 18-year-old me, admittedly not taking the mental health issues part as seriously as I should have, knew of his violent, sexist cringelord persona and commented, "Finding that out makes me hate him even more." And my best friend admitted finding out that he was that guy made him less sympathetic and taking my side more in this feud, much to poor Sam's dismay. Seriously, Sam, if you somehow come across this and remember this campaign, I'm so sorry. I know you're trying your best to make us all come together. However, this is sadly the end of the story, as at this point, things got busy in the DM couple and other players' lives, and it was put on indefinite hiatus until it was basically dead. There was no big final confrontation between us and Dave. He just slinked away into the interwebs, just becoming both a bad memory and a lingering reminder of my past cruddy actions. A few of us started up a new game together, myself, Lena, Nat, and Sam, with some new players, and we had a fun time, though I've sadly grown apart from everyone sans Lena. I do miss them. While this story was mostly taking the piss out of Dave and his creepy sex pest actions in-game, I think I made it clear neither me nor Nat were the heroes of this story. As obnoxious and pervy as Dave was, mental issues or no, they did not justify our actions against him. If you have a problem with the player, bring it up to the DM. Unless there's favoritism going on, or the DM is as much of a prick as the problem player, most good DMs will try to resolve the situation to avoid drama. Ultimately, that was probably my most traumatic experience with TTRPGs, which I ashamedly had a hand in. Dave, I hope you get the help you very clearly needed, and sorry for grieving you. And that concludes our story. Let's start off with the elephant in the room. Weeabo is a very bad problem player, maybe one of the worst in the stories I've covered so far. Edgelord might have a few criticisms about himself that is fair. I mean, it has been 12 years, so I'm sure he's a much better TTRPG player than he was then. But I think a lot of it is kind of fair. You're new, you're inexperienced, you don't know to talk to the DM ahead of time because something's rubbing you in the wrong way. You just want to shoot it down right there in game. And I think that's the main problem that Edgelord had. He tried to handle everything in-game. He tried to talk to Nat, which was someone he had a crush on, someone who, between the two of them, kept feeding each other like this idea that they can handle it themselves, they can put Dave in his place. The reality is, Dave needs to be kicked out of the group entirely, or if anyone's going to put him in this place, it's the DM, which clearly this DM duo was trying to help him, I guess, get over whatever he was going on in his real life. But the reality is, if the DMs want to give the guy therapy, it shouldn't be through a D&D campaign. They shouldn't be forcing all these people to sit through this weird therapy session with them, because all the DMs did was put him in a group with a bunch of girls, give him an NPC that feeds into the fetish that they want to help eliminate. I guess they were like, oh, you get the one and we'll wean you off, maybe? I don't really know what the DMs are trying to do here. I guess what I'm trying to say is I get why the Edgelord was angry. This really shouldn't have been his problem to deal with. The DMs clearly knew who this person was, and I feel like, at least personally, if I'm a DM, I'm not going to take a problem player on purpose trying to reform him. That's kind of wild. And clearly it just didn't work. I mean, obviously, the guy was maybe worse off at the end than he was at the beginning. But I really doubt they're going to address it in a way where the man was going to sit there and say, you know what, this in-game character's story was so good, I'm going to stop being a creep in real life. I don't think that happens. Out-of-game problems can't be solved with in-game solutions. That is my takeaway from this story, and very clearly, the guy was inexperienced, but if he were to communicate earlier, I think his main takeaway would have been that, hey, he tried his best. There's a couple people in the campaign that he likes playing with. If this DM isn't willing to kick this problem player, maybe it's time to start a new group like they eventually did anyways. Overall, I think this is maybe one of the worst stories I've read. It's a thrilling read for sure, and I'm glad I covered it on this channel. I'm curious to hear what you guys think of it. Make sure to like, subscribe, share this story. I love to see your thoughts. We'll see you in the next video. Farewell for now.